The Barbarian Path of the Storm Herald sucks, right? You'll often hear that sentiment when you're looking around trying to get information on the Path of the Storm Herald. And to be fair, it is one of the earliest released subclasses, which means that it is underpowered because we have power scaled so much since that time. But this is D&D Daily. We don't just give up on underpowered subclasses. No, we try and take them and make something beautiful out of them. This is your introduction to our new series, which is going to be 3 builds on the Path of the Storm Herald. Each one of these builds is going to specialize in their natural domain. So we're going to have desert, sea, and tundra. Today's build is the desert. Roll that intro. Now let's talk about our goals and limitations in this series. I am allowed to do any build, but it has to revolve around the Storm Herald's features. Those have to be core to the playstyle and the build and the flavor. And that's it. We're leaving the door wide open for us to be able to come in and use our creativity to make this consistently underpowered subclass as powerful as we possibly can. Now, what am I going to do with my Path of the Storm Desert Barbarian? Well, the concept I'm going for is someone who does a little bit of chip damage, because that's what the Desert Aura does, is a little bit of chip damage to many people as often as possible. And so we do a bunch of little bits of damage that add up to be a lot of damage. So this is going to be a character focused on damage output, but is also going to minor in control to keep them in our aura. How am I going to pull this off? Well, let's begin with the lineage. I went with the Radiant Consumption aasimar. Now, the reason for this is that the Radiant Consumption aasimar has an aura effect that does a little bit of chip damage to everybody around us, but it also does additional chip damage whenever we make an attack once per turn. So that's 2 instances of chip damage that we're adding to our overall playstyle. Excellent. Additionally, we get a heal, and barbarians' hit points go further than anybody else's because they have rage, which often is resisting damage. So every 1 hit point of barbarians equals 2 from anybody else. So now as a aasimar, we have a self-heal, which is going to go further than anybody else it would be used on. Alternatively, it can also be used to pick up allies as an emergency heal, so it's nice to have in our back pocket. The cherry on top is, of course, that we get a cantrip and we get dark vision, so we have light whenever we need it. Excellent. Now moving into our stats, we are going to have the typical barbarian stats. We're going to have strength primary, constitution secondary, dexterity needs to be 14 for medium armor, and then the remainder goes into wisdom to try and pad out our saves. Next up is our leveling structure. We're going to go 1 level into fighter, then we're going to go 5 levels into our Storm Herald Barbarian, then we're going to go 2 more levels into fighter, picking up the Rune Knight, and finally we're going to end with the remainder of our levels going into the Storm Herald Barbarian, though there's some variance on what we can do there at the end. We'll get into that as we get there. Now, the reminder of our key goal here. Our key goal is to take that fire aura and make a build around it, so keep that in mind as we're progressing. Now, that level 1 in fighter is really important to us because we get to pick up the unarmed fighting style. That's going to be huge for this build. The reason why is 1, we get to change our punches to D8 attacks. Great. On top of that, it allows us to deal 1d4 of damage to anyone we start our turn out grappling, but it can only be 1 person per turn. This is another instance of chip damage, and holding people in our aura is going to guarantee our chip damage. So now we have this kind of grapple striker style that we can begin building around. Since grappling is a big portion of this build, we're definitely going to want to pick up our proficiency in athletics here at this first level. Now, levels 2 and 3 are going to be us establishing our barbarian base. We're going to get rage. It's going to just increase our overall combat effectiveness, but really the discussion begins once we get that 3rd level and we become the desert barbarian. Now we have our fire aura whenever we're raging. Be careful, this also burns allies, but what we can now do is go pick up 2 enemies and we can drag them off away from our allies and let our aura burn them down. Or we can drag them into more enemies and have our aura hit even more people. Something else cool is we can stack our fire aura with our radiant consumption aura. So now we have 2 different auras dealing this damage again and again and again. So we're not doing a ton of damage with each instance of damage, but we're having consistent damage output by doing those little bits of damage multiple times over multiple turns to multiple enemies. We want all this little bit of damage to add up to something special. So let's count the potential instances of damage that we've put together already. We begin the turn grappling someone, so they take a d4 of damage. Then we decide to punch them in the face, so they take an additional d8 from the punch, but radiant consumption also kicks in and does an additional 2 points of damage, our proficiency bonus. Then we get to proc our aura as a bonus action, so that's the fire damage. They're also in our radiant consumption aura, so that's some radiant damage. And keep in mind, we were also raging, so we get an additional 2 damage when we did that attack earlier, coming to a total total of 6 instances of little bits of damage that have all stacked up on this one enemy. 2 of those instances of damage can hit multiple different enemies, so if we have 2 people grappled and we buy a third person, now we're doing those 2 instances of damage 3 times each. They can be a total of 6 instances of damage. So we are just chipping away at the total whole every single turn, little bit at a time, and it all adds up. Now moving into our mid levels, we're going to get extra attack, which is really going to help us come online. This allows us to set up grapples in combination with attacks or multiple grapples. It really allows us to maneuver better. Speaking of maneuverability, we're also going to get 10 feet extra movement speed, which is going to help us in our grapple game. There's a good time to talk about ASIs because we're picking up our first one here. I'm going to be focused on maximizing strength as early as possible. It just helps us do everything we want to do. It helps us in control and it helps us in our damage output and just overall consistency. Don't underestimate an ASI bump. Now that we have our 5 levels in Barbarian, we're going to take those 2 levels into Fighter. Action Surge is going to help with our overall consistency and just help us make plays. That's when I would use Action Surge, is when there's a play to be made. Otherwise, we're here for Rune Knight. Rune Knight does so many fantastic things for this build. So it's going to give us Giant Smite. Giant Smite is going to be another form that we can go big in. It makes us large instead of medium, and so that's going to increase the amount of people we can grapple. It increases our control. Additionally, once per turn, when we hit someone, we get to deal an extra d6 of damage. That's another instance of chip damage. Giant Smite also increases our size, which means it increases our aura size. So now we have a bigger fiery aura and a bigger radiant consumption aura. So we are going to be fantastic at just picking up an enemy or 2, running into the middle of enemies and just proccing both of our auras to deal a little bit of damage to a lot of people. We also come with some runes. The first one we have to talk about is the Fire Rune. This is going to allow us to restrain someone, deal additional chip damage, and then hold them in place while we get to do all of our other damage, some of it even at advantage. So it's very similar to grappling someone without actually having to grapple them. It's actually better because we also get advantage. The Fire Rune is going to be a really important rune for us. Next up, we have either the Cloud Rune or the Stone Rune. I think either of these can work well. We are someone who likes to grab enemies and then run into the middle of other enemies. In other words, we're surrounded by enemies, and a lot of them are going to want to kill us. Cloud Rune really takes some of that aggression and turns it against them. So it's pretty good for us to have because it increases our survivability and our damage output. On the flip side, we have Stone Rune. This is very similar to the Fiery Rune, but what it targets is a wisdom save. So someone who's really good against our grapples or at saving against our chains is really going to probably hate the Stone Rune because it's targeting a wisdom save. But it's very similar once it hits them. It's not going to deal additional damage, but now they're just kind of incapacitated, standing there doing nothing while we continue chipping away at their HP, 1 HP at a time. Now you may have noticed that we have 3 different forms, all of them taking a bonus action to turn on, as well as our fiery aura needs a bonus action to proc every single turn. So we are bonus action heavy. Those 3 forms are going to be our Giant Smite, Rage, as well as our Radiant Consumption. Part of the fun of this character is going to know how many forms to turn on per combat. There are going to be some combats we want all 3 forms on. Then there's going to be a ton that we want maybe 1. A lot of the skill of this character is going to come down to resource management. We want to use the exact amount of resources for the combats at hand. And I personally really love that decision-making process. Now what we do at this level is largely up to taste. What I'm going to do is I'm going to continue down the Barbarian line. It's probably not going to be the most powerful endgame character, but it is going to commit more to that Barbarian flavor. We're going to get to do more fiery things. We're going to get the ability to just touch flammable objects and light them on fire, which I think is pretty neat. We're going to be able to give fire resistance to our allies so that we don't really care if they're in our fire aura. They're going to take half the amount of damage as all of our enemies, so it's probably just worth doing, unless maybe they're concentrating. And most importantly, it's just going to give us more rages to do more fiery aura things. What we've built here at the end of the day is a control-based striker who has some AoE damage to deal with mobs. Are we the most well-rounded character in the world? No. Range is going to definitely be a problem for us, and wisdom saves are also a weakness of ours, but we've taken the core idea from the Desert Barbarian and we've really focused on making it something special, and so I'm proud of this build despite its power level not being as high as other ones can be. But let me know what you would have done given the same prompts. If you want to see our other 2 Storm Herald build videos, they're already released on our Patreon. Consider checking it out to get early access. But with that, my friends, I hope you have yourselves an incredible day, and I'll catch you on the next one. See you then.